Over the years, a number of people have asked me about whether or not it's safe to have blood transfusions. And these people are usually concerned about exposure to spike protein. So there's a lot of information out there, and people can get anxious. I have always learned that you never dismiss someone's concern. It doesn't matter whether you agree with them, you disagree with them, whether you have different views, just have a frank and honest scientific discussion. And in truth, what they are saying is that, or they are asking, is it safe to get blood where you don't know whether or not circulating either spike protein or potentially mRNA in exosomes are still in the blood? And so, therefore, if they are unvaccinated, they're worried about getting vaccinated blood. That's the fundamental. Now, what I usually say is I apply the principle of risk benefit. If you were in a car accident and you're bleeding profusely and you're going to die because you can't get blood, the least of your concerns should be whether or not it's possible that there could be some remnants in the blood that you're getting. You just want to stay alive. And so it becomes a risk benefit decision in every situation. But what you must not do is pretend that the science is settled. We are not absolutely sure. And in the longer term, we may find that there are some issues here, largely because spike protein we know is stuck in immune cells. Now, we know that there is circulation of spike protein, but most blood is filtered. So you're not just getting whole blood. Very often they centrifuge it, spin it down, take off the red blood cells, take off the plasma, so you're not getting just whole blood. So even if there were remnants in there, there's a good possibility most, if not all, would have been removed. But interestingly, that's not why I'm talking. What I'm talking about today is something that caught my attention that is related to this. And it was this headline about artificial blood factories go online producing 10,000 liters per hour with zero blood type rejection. Now, the first thing that you have to realize is that this is probably not true. There is no scientific evidence that there is a company that is doing that. The trials are still in very early stage. But the principle is what caught my attention. If you can use stem cells to produce red blood cells in O negative format, could you resolve the long-term concerns in terms of accessibility to blood transfusions and critically for even those cohorts who are afraid and concerned about it from other points of view? That was what caught my attention, because I know there are many people concerned about it. And if there was a way that it could be done, that would be wonderful. That was my first response. So what I'm sharing with you now is some of the science, because as soon as I saw it, I then went and looked at the science. Is this possible? Who is doing it? So there are some early stage trials that they're looking at. So it's not straightforward. But when I looked at the physiology of how the body produces red blood cells, you then realize just how remarkable the human body is. It is incredible how it does it, and it would be so difficult to replicate at a scale that would be equivalent to what the body does. And that's where the reality is. So I thought I'd take you through a little bit of the science. And so a few things for you to think about when we look at red blood cells, and I hope you can see this here. When we think of stem cells, because this is what they would have used, stem cells to produce red blood cells. And when you look at what happens normally, this is from my biorender, you have these pluripotent cells that can produce multiple types of cells. These are neurons, these are mesodermal cells, muscle cells, blood cells, kidney cells. Endoderm is beta cells, lung cells, pancreas. So each one of these cells can produce a multitude of different cells. And this is why they're called stem cells. And this is why they are so important. In the context of what we're talking about with regards to red blood cells, what then happens is that it breaks down from these stem cells. It then separates into another group of myeloid progenitor cells. Then it splits where it can make red blood cells or platelets. And this is the transition that you would need to produce at scale to be able to make red blood cells easily. Now, as I was going through that research, I then stumbled into something that is really what caught my attention. And so, depending on your interest in science, would determine whether or not you find this fascinating. But as I looked at how the red blood cells go through the process of being formed, I stumbled into this thing called erythroblastic islands. Okay, this is a paper on it. Erythroblastic islands, macrophages shape normal erythropoiesis. That's the making of red blood cells. This was done in China, and I think it was published in 2020. Now, what stood out to me about this paper was just how complex the physiology is. Now, look at this. This is how it works in the body when it's producing red blood cells. You start in the bone marrow with the hematopoietic progenitor stem cells. They then differentiate into one BFUE. I'm not telling you what type they are. So this is the maturation phase from this stem cell producing, going down the line until it produces red blood cells. So it goes through a number of stages and maturation stages to produce red blood cells. Now, this is the bit that will not be easy to replicate because it then has these islands, macrophage islands, where these are immune cells, macrophages, and these immature red blood cells attach themselves onto it and then have to go through a maturation where they get rid of their nucleus, they get rid of all of the RNA inside them, and they just have hemoglobin as the primary product. And this immature erythroblastic island then becomes mature, and you can see the red blood cells. When they become red, that's when they would go off into the bloodstream from the bone marrow. And so this macrophage sits and almost nurses them like you would do with an egg until it's mature. And then these red blood cells go into the bloodstream where they survive for about 120 days. And this is how the cycle goes. Now, listen, that I cannot see how it would be easy to replicate that process in a lab, because the use of the immune system to prepare these cells is incredible. And this is why, as I said, as I looked at it and I realized the complexity of what they'll have to do in order to achieve it, it's quite stunning. They would also have to ensure that they address the ABO blood types. Now, there are multiple different kinds of blood types, but the most common is the ABO system. And when you look at it, essentially what it is saying, I'll make this a little bit bigger, your red blood cells will, in some people, have an A antigen on it, and those people will produce anti-B antibodies because they won't produce antibodies to the A antigen. If they have a B antigen on their red blood cells, they will produce anti-A antibodies. If they have both A and B, they produce no antibodies. If they have no A or B, they produce both anti-A and anti-B antibodies. This is the O blood group. This is the most common blood group. And so the problem is that you need to match these blood groups in order to transfuse blood. The type O rhesus negative is the one that can be transfused in almost everybody. And this is what they would be trying to make. But as I said, the process of making that mature red blood cell is so complicated that there is no easy way to do it. They have tried other techniques to do this, to try and get this O blood cell. This is where they use gut bacterial enzymes to clip off the A and you can see this a little bit more closely. So this is the red blood type A red blood cell with the type A antigen on it, and they would then use enzymes to clip off the A and then produce type O blood. Not so easy to do, as I said. So the reality is, and this is where we come back to the science and the ethics. When we think of the implications longer term of circulating spike protein, as some people, if they're concerned about people being vaccinated and then circulating RNA or spike protein, yes, you would have to acknowledge that there is a very small risk. But I'd encourage people, when you're thinking about these things, to think about the risk and the benefit. What is the risk in the moment? How serious is it? Because people never take blood transfusions just for the sake of it. It usually means that you are in a situation where the risk of not having a transfusion is higher than your risk of having one. There are some companies I've heard of, like Safe Blood, where they primarily focus on unvaccinated people to reduce that risk. But the truth is that that is not necessarily scalable worldwide. And so we always have these challenges in front of us with regards to the science. At the end of the day, what would be perfect is if we could find a way to safely and effectively produce red blood cells. And even then, you would probably be arguing who is the donor? Because we know that spike protein can lodge in stem cells as well, infection and vaccination. So it's not necessarily easy to find anybody who has no exposure to it. But the principle being, you would want to find stem cells, maybe from placenta. Placental stem cells could probably do it, that would then produce unlimited amounts of red blood cells and would allow us to be able to transfuse people who need blood without the concern for some of the. There are no easy answers. But as we end, emphasizing the point, if you are concerned, I would never tell you that it is irrelevant. Anyone's concern is always relevant. I would tell you that we don't have enough science to say that there is absolutely no risk. However, based on how blood is used and how blood is prepared, the risk, I think, would be minuscule compared to the benefit that you would get if you were offered a blood transfusion. Because as I say, that's not just done for anything. You really have to need to want it or need it in order for it to be given. So that's the end of my scientific discourse. I hope you find that useful. Look forward to sharing more information with you in the near future.
A hero, an immune adventure, Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.